I love dark fantasy not because of the suffering, but because I think that the greatest dark fantasy stories are also the ones that show humanity with the most depth. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. 3 fantasy stories that really get at the raw honesty of different pieces of humanity, of what it means to be human. The first one is Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy, which shouldn't be a surprise if you've seen any of my other videos because I talk about him constantly. So Joe Abercrombie is really great at getting at the psychology of people. His stories are really dark, but I think that while he's able to get at the selfishness and brutality of people, he's also able to show little genuine moments of care and kindness and sweetness and connection between people as well. And you can see that with practically all of his characters, even some of the worst ones. Well, except for, the worst one. So let's get into some of those characters. There's going to be some spoilers in this video because I'm going to have to talk about examples of the characters being real. So, just be aware that there will be spoilers. So don't watch if you don't want spoilers for the stories that I talk about. For Joe Abercrombie, first we have Glokta, and a key moment with him is how he always says, "Why do I do this?" Right? That's a continual quote for Glokta. And I think that really gets at, like, yes, he's a torturer and he's doing something horrible and that's why he's asking it. But I think it goes beyond that and it gets at something about people and when we try to change and when we realize that we're not in a place that we want to be and how we think about that and deal with it. The problem with Glokta is that he doesn't want to be doing what he's doing, right? He wanted to be like a famous swordsman and do great military things and be a hero, right? And that's who he thought that he would be. And now he is this other person that he doesn't want to be. And so he keeps asking himself, like, through all of his pain and suffering, why does he keep doing it? He knows he could go home and be with his mother, but he doesn't, even though that would be a more peaceful life for him because of his drive. Glokta has an internal drive to just keep getting better and better at what he's doing, to succeed, and he can't let go of that. And in the story and in this horrible, brutal world, the way that it is, only choices that he really has are to go home or be this brutal person that he is. And he would rather live a life where he feels like he's doing something and he's good at something, even if it's this terrible thing. And so that really gets at, I think, people and that question that we can often have about our lives of, like, why do I keep doing something that I maybe don't want to do, or that, like, I don't value the thing that I'm doing. But do we keep doing it because of something that's at our core that we feel like we will lose if we don't do this thing? Or do we stop to hold on to another value? And I just think that's a really interesting dilemma and conflict, internal conflict within a person that we can all have, even if we're not crazy torturers like Glokta. Another character that we see this with is Jezal, who lies to himself a lot. And now Jezal is probably the most hated character in the first book of everyone. But I do think that these little moments where he's lying to himself kind of get at something about people and what we do. Especially, I think of the scene where he's going to meet Artie in the square, but he knows that he shouldn't, and he knows that if he does, that it's gonna be bad for her. So he's telling himself that he's not gonna go and he's not gonna do it. But literally, as he's having these thoughts in his mind, he is going to the square. He desires it too much, so he's lying to himself even on the way there. And I just loved that part because I think that we do that, maybe with smaller issues than Giselle and Artie, but we often can have a deep desire or a deep emotion, and even as we're like rationally monologuing to ourselves that we objectively know that it's wrong or that we shouldn't do something, not even if it's morally wrong, just like, oh, this could lead to something I don't really want in my future or something like that, but we will be telling ourselves that at the same time that the emotion is more powerful and we're following it, even though we pretend like we're not. So I really thought that was great about Giselle as well. And then finally, even side characters for Abercrombie are really, you get this depth from them. So later on in the story, when Severard is attacked and he thinks he's gonna die and he says, "My birds," that was such an impactful moment for me when I read the story, and I felt so bad for him, and I was like, oh my God. Even this character who's been pretty terrible throughout the books has something innocent that he cares about. He has these birds and he's worried about what will happen to them without him. And that just brings a depth to a character like that I very rarely see in other stories. How often do you have a more villainous character caring about their birds? And this is such a small moment, and he's a pretty small character in the series. To get that from him and with just 2 words, I think just demonstrates the skill of Abercrombie and how well he can go into human psychology. He can like understand what sort of makes us emotional and get at these little pieces of people to do something like that with his characters. The next story that I want to talk about is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, which is also a super dark world and very brutal. I love the stories. I think the magic system is super unique, and so many things that Jemisin does is unbelievably unique. But part of that is her ability to take this brutal world and create these raw, honest characters in it. They're often not even likable, but they're truthful. They feel real, and I feel like it's that realness when we're reading that keeps us going and keeps us wanting to follow the characters, even when they sometimes do things that are really harsh and unfair and unlikable. So the first character that we can talk about is Aeson, who right off the bat, the beginning of this story is her pain, just raw, horrible, brutal pain that we have to experience with her, and Jemisin does not hide it. She lets you see the scene. She lets you see what happened to Aeson's son and how she responds to that. And then after just being in the house and feeling the pain, just leaving but still shutting down at the same time. And it's a really hard part of the story, I think, to sit with, as so many parts of the story are. But that feeling, like, you can really feel it in Aeson's character and her reaction, just the trauma that this situation is for her. So I think Jemisin does that really well, and it's something that she doesn't try to lessen for the sake of the reader. She lets it be what it is in its full honesty. In addition to Eason is her daughter in her daughter's story, which also I just think, even in this world that is magical and falling apart, we see this sort of like coming of age with Nassan in a way that represents the difficulty of that and the harshness of when somebody comes to realize that their parents weren't who they thought they were and distances themselves from their parents and forms their own independent thinking about the world that may be in opposition to their parents. Now, this is an extreme situation with Nassan, but I think it gets at something real about childhood and something that is painful and is hard and makes kids feel lonely and disconnected when they come to this realization. So I think it gets into, again, something real, something honest about human psychology and the way that our lives often are, without trying to hide from it at all, with like letting it be the painful thing that it is. Finally, the last story might be a bit of a surprise, but it's Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I don't think this story is usually viewed as being as dark as say, a Joe Abercrombie story or the Broken Earth trilogy, but it does have a sadness to it and a brutality. I think as the story goes along, it becomes more and more brutal as you sort of learn some of the answers to the questions that you have at the beginning of this story. But again, I think that the world that Clarke builds here and the situation that is so dark is what allows us to get Piranesi's naivete and his innocence and shine a light or demonstrate something about the human condition that is very honest and she's capable of doing because of how she sets up this story and because of the darkness that sits behind it. He is such a pure, like, trusting, kind character. And for me, it feels like the erasure of him from the rest of humanity, the fact that he is isolated and that he has no memory of people outside of the place that he is in, allows him this pureness, and it allows the reader to see that kind of perspective where he just rejoices so much in simple pleasures like getting a new pair of shoes, and he takes in all these moments of beauty in the world around him and awe in the world around him, in these statues and the currents and the moon. And it's just this simple life where he can be more still and see the awe of the world and feel that in a way that I think is really difficult for us to do now with so many distractions and so much going on. But it's something that when we can do it, it's beautiful and amazing, and it gets at something more meaningful about life than, the day-to-day distractions often do. And so I think that through the darkness of the situation that's happening to him, we get this like purity of life that is so interesting and hard to see in real life. But is something true about how we can be in the world. And then he also has this sweetness and this care that we can even see without him really getting to interact with anybody. He sees these dead bodies, and he takes care of them, and he cares about them, and he imagines what they need and tries to give those needs to them. And again, it's just this sort of pure level of kindness that seems to partly be there because he's taken away from the natural world, or from a world full of humans, and they're the bad parts about us, the lies and the deceit and the brutality that we see a lot in the other two stories I mentioned. And he is able to have like just a deeper sense of being because of that. So those are my thoughts about these 3 fantasy books. I hope you liked them. I'd love to hear from you if you agree with my ideas, or if you disagree, or if you think that there's other books that are more optimistic. I think Piranesi is pretty optimistic by the end, but I definitely think it has a deep level of darkness underlying it as well. But if you do know of books that you think are more optimistic or even bittersweet, that do a better job at kind of like getting at the depths of humanity, then I'd love to hear your examples or any disagreements you have. And feel free to check out my channel to see different reviews about other fantasy stories.